Great. Thank you, Matt, and thank you for everybody that's taking your time to participate with us today. Um, so as Matt said, the legislative session ended March 8th, so a little over a month ago, and it was very active as it relates to community associations. In fact, for those of you that might be managers that manage, HOAs, um, if we'd been doing this, last year, typically, if you were in an HOA, you could have already turned off the webinar and gone to lunch. But that is not the case this year because there was a large HOA reform package that passed as well. And we're going to focus on the condo reform package, but there was an HOA package. So we won't spend a lot of time on it because this is for condos, but just be aware because I know that some of you manage both types of communities. Um, the, the other thing that I want to kind of just keep in mind as a general overview is that none of these bills that we're going to be talking about, all of them passed the legislature. So they are passed in the final form that we will be discussing. But none of them have yet been signed or approved by the governor. Talked to the governor's office again yesterday. They are still asking questions, working on their analysis to kind of understand the issues to present to him. Once the bills are presented to the governor, he'll have 15 days to sign them, veto them, or they become law without signature. There is no timetable that's written down in a rule or a law that dictates when those have to go. Just the math of knowing that he has 15 days, and these would be effective July 1 of 2024. They really just need to get to him by mid-June for him to have those 2 weeks to address them and to weigh in. We'll keep monitoring them. I will mention a website real quick for you to be able to go and get information on these bills, and then you can also track them, and they will give you you'll get an update by either email or text, however you choose, when anything happens. And on these bills, the only thing that'll happen, since they're not going through committee or anything anymore, will be that day when it goes to the governor, and then you'll get a notice when the governor signs it or vetoes it. But we suspect these will be signed. That website is www.flsenate.gov. You'll see up at the top left-hand corner, it's already designated in the drop down for the 2024 session. You'll just need to put the bill number. You don't need to worry about House bill or Senate bill. Just put in the one that we're going to be talking about first is House Bill 1021, the condo reform bill. Just put that number there. It'll bring up the page. It has a whole bunch of things, and then you'll see up at the top, do you want to track this bill? Click that, and you can start tracking it. So let me start by saying this. If the strategy that your community had as it relates to milestone inspections or structural integrity reserve studies or any of these things was, you know what, we're going to wait. The deadline isn't until December 31st, 2024. We're gonna hold off because the legislature is gonna wake up one day and say, oh my God, we were just kidding, and repeal this or change this or slow this down. Very similar to maybe what they did if you're in a high rise and you remember the sprinkler retrofit issues where they just kind of kicked that can down the road for about 20 years. Well, that strategy will need to be revised because that did not happen. The legislature, there were many things that we were attempting to do. Matt is a very valuable resource living and working with these documents in these communities. And we were saying, things like, this needs to be tweaked. We're not going to be able to have the associations. We don't have enough people to do these by the deadline. Can we, all different attempts to make tweaks, changes, even clarifications, etc. And the legislature, particularly the House of Representatives, held very strong and firm on, no, we really, really mean it. We really want these people to start reserving and kind of, no pun intended, but getting their house in order because, and again, a lot of people were saying, well, you know what? We don't want to be reserving every month because we just tell us when you need the money. We'll do it all through special assessment. And the legislature would come back and say, no, that's what happened at Surfside, where they just said, let us know when you need the money. They waived reserves, waived reserves. Oh, by the way, we need $8 million. And then the unit owner said, no, we don't want to pay. They recalled that board, et cetera. So they still have that very much fresh in their mind. So they're very hesitant to delay. We'll talk at the end here of my remarks about kind of the one little reporting change that they did make to SIRS. And then Matt will get into the specifics. But real quick, just some highlights, just so you're aware what's out there. There were significant changes made to the way managers operate as it relates to conflicts of interest and that disclosure that needs to happen, and then the procedure that would need to go through to approve a contract, and the notice that's required with such a contract. You can still do it. There's not a strict prohibition against using say a vendor that might be the best vendor for this particular job, but there's a relationship between the manager and that vendor. But there's some hoops that will now need to be gone through. There also are some remedies that a board and a community can make if those disclosures were not known by manage, and the association can either rescind the contract, cancel the contract, or certainly the board. So there's things to remember on that. There's deadlines now. You have 20 days to return records. When one association goes from one management firm to another, there were a lot of things that the legislature heard that were where these management companies were slow walking some of these documents. So now they said, well, you have 20 days to get those documents over, and if you don't, there's going to be $1,000 a day fine. So things like that, certainly to be very mindful of. A lot of what occurred on behalf of associations that you now need to be mindful of happened is after the legislature passed 154 last year, they embarked on a listening tour, a town hall meeting tour, and primarily these town hall meetings were being held in Southeast Florida, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, but they were the legislators were going and listening, and they were hearing a whole bunch of stuff that was well beyond things that dealt with the structural integrity and the milestones and inspections and those issues. And the thought was, we're getting ready to put a lot more money in the system and to put a lot more responsibility on associations and on boards and require different repairs to be done, et cetera. And the foundation of condo world doesn't seem to be ready to take that. So they really looked at, well, how do we improve upon that? So do not think of this, no matter what webinar you may have heard where they talk about the Condo 3.0. This is more of a prequel and not a sequel. This is not something that could have, that deals a lot with the things that passed after 4D and 154. This is stuff that could have passed and been dealt with years ago, probably should have been. And those are the types of things. I'll give you a quick example of a change that happened, again, just because of the things that were happening based on going to these town hall meetings these legislators were hearing. So they would go in and people would say, we don't get to talk at our board meetings. We don't get to say anything. We just have to sit there. They tell us what they've done. We don't know what's going on. And then the other half of the room would say, oh my God, how precious. Oh my God, you have meetings? Huh. We don't even have meetings in our association. And they would say, wait, what? And somebody would say, yeah, oh yeah, we haven't had a meeting in years in our association. So the legislature made it very clear that there will be 4 meetings a year. And then they also made it clear that they will be quarterly, because somebody, made the suggestion, well, we'll have 4 meetings. We'll make them Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We'll gavel in, we'll gavel out 4 straight days. We'll do a board meeting retreat and done. No, you will have 4 meetings quarterly to make sure that it gives it for maximum participation. And then also you will take questions. So there will be things that you will have to tell, that you will have to give reports on construction, current construction, planned construction. And various things they have to do. And then also, oh, by the way, you have to open it up for questions just pretty much on anything that a member may want to talk about. So those are the types of things, again, as you're working, living, serving in condos, that you're going to need to be familiar with. Another thing that happened, access to records is a huge issue. They're trying to get a handle on that. Way before Surfside, there was legislation had passed that said you have to have a website if you have 150 units or more. Surfside had less than 150 units, I think 136 units. So they said, well, clearly that, that's not the right number. So they have, and because they're dealing with, there's a lot of complaints out there. It's the #1 complaint DBPR gets is access to records. I can't get records. So they said, you will have a website if you have 25 units or more. So condos with 25 units or more will have to have a website. That they give a little bit of time, effective January 1 of 2026. But you'll have to have a website or a mobile app. There's a lot of these apps out there now that also, but then there's a list of records that have to be uploaded and kept up to date on that website. And again, it's supposed to be a two-way street of help, where the managers and the board can say to unit owners, it's on the website, here it is, creates some a lot of the backlog that happens with a lot of requests. That should clear up. But then it also provides, very importantly, for members of a community to be able to access the records that they should be entitled, that they are entitled to. There are things such as you can't just provide, when you do provide records for inspection, oftentimes communities would say, here's a conference room, here's a few, big boxes of records, you have a few hours, knock yourself out. Now you have to provide a checklist of here's what we're giving you, and so that what you're handing over. So there's not just this, searching grandma's closet and you're not really even sure what you're looking for. They also increased the said that if records are lost or destroyed, you have to make a good faith obligation, manager or association. You have to make a good faith effort to obtain those records or recover those records. You can't just simply say, we don't have it, and that be the end of it. You've got to try to find it or locate it and provide it. It allows email addresses and fax numbers, if anybody's still using those, to be accessible to unit owners if consent to receive notice by electronic transmission had been provided. On that note, also, you can now vote electronically and elect to vote electronically by electronic means. Currently, you have to say in writing, I want to vote electronically. So both in all three, in condos, co-ops, and in HOAs, in the HOA bill, a change was made to say, no, you can let us know electronically that you want to vote electronically. There's a new set of criminal penalties. For years and years and years, people would say, oh no, can't have any criminal penalties. You'll never have anybody serve on the board. Another thing that these legislators found is there were all these meetings where people were saying, I want to serve on my board. I'm trying to serve on my board. They finagled it and made it such that I can't serve on my board. So now and so the legislators heard that and said, you know what? We hear all the time, nobody's going to want to serve on the board, but yet we've been hearing from a lot of people that want to serve. So let's see how this plays out. We don't really think that that's going to hold. that nobody will be on boards. And then also these criminal penalties are not just for a mistake. They're not just for, oh, I didn't provide you with the records in 10 days, et cetera. These, and I'll read these real quickly. These are for significant efforts to conceal and repeatedly violate the law. So it's a second-degree misdemeanor for any director or board of a member or association to knowingly, willfully, and repeatedly violate, which are 2 or more violations within a 12-month period, any specified requirements related to inspection and copying of official records of an association. It's a first-degree misdemeanor for knowingly and intentionally defacing or destroying required accounting records or failing to create or maintain required accounting records. It's a third-degree felony to willfully and knowingly refuse to release or produce association records with the intent to avoid or escape detection, arrest, trial, or punishment for the commission of a crime or to assist another person with such evidence or escape. It's a third-degree felony for an officer, director, or manager of a condominium association to knowingly solicit, offer to accept, or accept a kickback. It defines what a kickback is. And it's a first-degree misdemeanor for engaging in specified fraudulent voting activity and knowingly aiding, abetting, or advising a person in the commission of a fraudulent voting activity related to association elections. The focus really is on transparency, and then also looking at some of these high-profile criminal cases that were brought both in Miami-Dade and in other places where we see there were reports of real misdealings between whether an association and or a manager that they really want to curtail. Regarding the financial reporting, also based on your budget, you have to do a various level of financial report, a full-blown audit, a compilation, a report. You used to be able to waive those kind of consecutively and then do it every 3 years or so. Now you cannot waive those more than on consecutive years. So every other year you're going to have to do that. The meetings, I think I mentioned this, associations of 10 or more units have to meet quarterly and 4 times a year. And the agenda must allow members to ask questions concerning the status of construction or repair projects, revenues, expenditure, other condominium issues.
Travis,
Education.
Travis,
Yes.
on that, sorry, we did have a question really kind of right in
Oh,
that
yes,
area.
yes.
Is it still a 3-minute time limit, do you know, or did they not change that? Because I
An
think there was someone.
association based on their documents can make it, they can still provide some parameters and say, it's a 3 minutes, those kinds of things. Yes, but they can't just say, no, at this meeting, you're not allowed to ask anything. But that's a good question. But
Right,
yes,
and then one of the rules maybe could be that you would submit their questions in advance of the meeting, possibly.
yes, absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
Great
Um,
question, Carol.
Education. So there used to be for board members, and this again will apply for you managers. This is going to apply, and then it's actually more for HOAs specific. There's some specific HOA issues for managers and for education, of board member education in the HOA bill. Let me mention real quick so you can go and look it up in that website I gave you. The HOA bill is 1203, 1203. But for condo education, there used to be, this provision that said, you have to do education within 90 days of being elected to a board, or, oh, by the way, you could also just certify that you've read and understand your documents, and then you're good. That no longer is going to be the case. You're going to need to take a 4-hour course. You will have time. There's going to be time because a lot of board members already have reported. We report in March, typically have already reported to DBPR their board member, information and paid their $4 fee and all of that annual reporting they've done. So it would be a year from that. So, there's some time, you have some time, but just know that you're gonna have to do 4 hours of training for new board members coming in. And that's everybody that's even on the board now that initial training for 4 hours. And then for those that stay on the board, returning board members will have to do an annual one hour of training that's kind of a catch up, kind of a legislative update, something like this that could get approved, where you just are catching up with kind of continuing education. These are the new things that have passed. So it'll be 4 hours initially, and then 1 year, 1 hour after that for existing folks. The division of condominiums that I mentioned, condominiums, timeshares, mobile homes within the department had always been very limited in what they could do post turnover. So after a developer has turned over an association, there were very limited issues that they could get engaged in. 3, and now with the SIRS coming on board with reserve studies, since they never had to deal with that before, that would be the 4th. But often the department would just say, oh, it's not one of these 3 things, case closed. And they would say, hey, to the legislators, we're 90% closed on our cases, 97%, because they would just close the case. They wouldn't have to do anything. The bill greatly expands the division's post-turnover jurisdiction to now include procedures and records relating to financial issues, including annual financial reporting, assessments for common expenses, fines, commingling of funds, elections, including elections and voting requirements and recall of board members, the maintenance of and unit owner access to association records, the procedural aspects of meetings such as the unit owner meetings, the quorums, the voting requirements, proxies, board of administrations, budget meetings, similar to what Matt said. Let's say somebody had said, look, there was absolutely no ability to ask questions. That could be a complaint. The disclosure of the conflicts of interest that we've talked about, both, for board members. The Division of Professions deals with the new conflicts of interest for managers. The procedural completion of structural integrity reserve studies, and then the catch-all, any written inquiries by unit owners to the association. So if you've asked about something, you're not getting, the real desire there was to say, look, you shouldn't have to always just hire an attorney. And that was always the answer and legislators would say to condo complaints and condo issues, both on the board side and the unit owner side, hey, we need, call DBPR. They're the jurisdiction of Department of Jurisdiction on this, and DBPR would say, nope, we can't do anything. And the legislature didn't like the fact that nobody was helping on anything. It also requires that the division must refer to local law enforcement authorities, like your state attorney, any person that it believes has engaged in criminal activities. So now, if in some of these investigations they're doing, if they say this is actual crime, a crime here, they are now required to turn that in. And then also provides the division and the office, they may attend and observe any meeting of the board or any unit owner meeting for the purpose of performing the duties of the division or the office of the ombudsman. You can't say there was an association that was saying to the division, no, you're not allowed to come. And they said, well, we're going to do it. They also can get access to the website to do, if there's a complaint that says, look, this information is supposed to be on the website, not on the website, they're able to get that unit owner, password access to get into the website to review. Let's see, there were for that work that's going to be done, there was about $8 million, almost $8 million put into the General Revenue Fund for the Department of Business Professional Regulation to hire 65 employees, full-time employees, to help administer this. So that is going to be help there. There's do you want me to hit on before we kick it over to get into the in-depth SIRS stuff? Matt, do you want me to real quick mention the MySafe Florida Home Condo Pilot Program?
Absolutely. Yeah, we won't be able to get all the
I think that one's important. So there's a bill, and another one to write down and to check. 1029. Again, you don't need to know HB, SB, just know 1029, which is the MySafe Florida condo program for the MySafe Florida Home program. For years, we've had a MySafe Florida Home program. It lapsed. They didn't fund it. It was still on the books, but they didn't fund it for a few years. Then, as part of the insurance special session, they put in a lot of money and said, look, we really want to revamp this because people can get grants for hardening of their home. Not only does it help the consumer get money, but then also on the grant, but then also you're now participate in wind mitigation credits with your insurance carrier, blah, blah, blah. So they put in about $280 million for the program, MySafe Florida Home program. We asked at that point, really worked hard to say condos are homeowners too. Can we include them? Oh no, that's too complicated. No, we can't do that in the special session, but we definitely will talk about it during the regular session. So we kept pushing, and then ended up this year passing 1029 that starts a pilot program. Again, it's on the books for 5 years. We can expand it if it becomes something, both the program and get rid of that sunset. If it's something that becomes popular, I think it will. I'm going to encourage all of you that when this goes into effect July 1, there's going to be $30 million. That might sound like a lot of money, but it is not a lot of money when you're dealing with all the associations, that could be eligible. And once that money's gone, that last check is written, that's all the money they would have for the year unless it's reappropriated. So we really want associations to participate so that we can go back and say, look, people are really clamoring for this. Can we do in the middle of the fiscal year, can we do a shift, put more money in it, or certainly next year in the appropriations bill, can we put really more of a robust money there? There's a lot of legislators that think condos will never be able to figure this out and they won't get there. I have more faith in you than them. I think we can. Quickly, there's some eligibility requirements. First of all, you have to be within 15 miles of the coast. That's the first. There were various discussions about, do we make it 3 stories and less? But we negotiated where it's eligible. It doesn't matter the size of your building, age, any of that, but it has to be 15 miles from the coast. So that's the first one. You have to have skin in the game as an association. So it's basically a 2-for-1. For every dollar you spend on, let's say, a roof project for hardening and getting the proper hurricane strapped, good roof, for every dollar you spend, the state grant would be $2. The limit for that an entire association can get is $175,000. Again, for this pilot program, starting it off with the way the money we have, $175,000. It's divided up amongst the roof is you can get up to $1,000 per unit for the roof, up to $1,500 for other things, opening related projects, windows, doors, other types of things. That's $1,500 per unit. In order to get the inspection, it's a free inspection. That's important to know because we've been talking a lot about milestone inspections and the SIRS and all that. This is an inspection that is administered by the Department of Financial Services. They contract with local inspectors. Those inspectors will come out. In order to get the inspection, just to get a baseline and know where you are, doesn't cost you anything. That you have to do with the board. There has to be a majority vote of the board or a majority vote of the unit owners. One of those two things, hold on a second, has to happen. Let me because we're getting ready to get into some specifics here on this real quick. Hold on. So keep that in mind. That is to get the inspection, to apply for the inspection. Must be receive approval by a majority vote of the board of directors or a majority vote of the total voting interest of the association. Then, and this is the tricky part, so you get your report. It says, hey, if you do this inspection to your roof, and you've got the inspection, you do this type of a roof, you're going to be able to get apply for this money, or windows and doors, et cetera, to apply for a grant, the association must receive both of the following. Number one, approval by a majority vote of the board of directors or a majority vote of the total voting interest of the association to participate in that's to get the inspection. But then to get the grant, you have to have a unanimous vote of all unit owners within the building that is subject to that. So maybe you have 5 buildings and you're only going to go after one because that's the roof you need to do, blah, blah. Not everybody, but that building, you have to get unanimous vote because, again, you're having to spend money to do the roof. So we fought against this unanimous thing because we said we cannot get in an association, we cannot get 100% of the people in a condo to agree that today's Friday. It's impossible. Again, that's why I say there's a lot of skepticism that we're going to be able to pull this off. But I think if you're able to say, hey, here's the money we are going to have to spend anyway on a roof because of either our reserve study or because of our insurance company, but we can get up to, let's say it's the, $100,000 towards it. If you just vote on this, then your amount goes down, unit owner. I think we can get that done. The votes required may take place at the annual budget meeting or at a unit owner meeting called for this purpose. And before a vote may be taken, the association must provide the unit owners a clear disclosure of the program on a form that's being created now by the department. So when this takes effect July 1, the department will come out with this form. Right now, you can go to the My Safe Florida Home program. It's online, mysafefloridahome.com, I think it even is, but you can just Google My Safe Florida Home program, and you can see exactly the form, the things, the way it all works right now. It's up and running for single family homes. So you'll get an idea that that's where you will go. That's what they will change and then have the condo form. The president and the treasurer of the board must sign the disclosure form indicating that a copy of the form was provided to each unit owner of the association, and the signed disclosure form and the minutes from the meeting at which the unit owners voted to participate in the program must be maintained as part of the official records. And then the last thing is within 14 days after an affirmative vote to participate in the program, the association must provide written notice to all unit owners of that decision. So again, I would absolutely get the inspection. That'll give you kind of a guideline of where you are in your building, what kind of things you could do that are eligible for this hardening and wind mitigation program. And then not only if you do it, then also you get the benefit again of getting savings on your insurance as it relates to wind mitigation credits. Anything else I need to cover on that, or do you want to talk?
One quick question, just is the funding from Glenn chimed in here, is the funding retroactive? Like say they redid the roofs this year, would they be able to apply for it? Do you know?
No. The way the department is going to be looking at this is a prospective going forward, because you have to be voting to decide, you're going to do this. So we argued for that to say, hey, if you already did the roof and here's, and I would still show that to the inspector because it is a bit, there's a bit of a gray area. And I would absolutely show that to the inspector because you could still be using that for wind mitigation credits. But right now the department is saying, given the limited resource, we're trying to do this for going projects going forward. So the SIRS change that they made, big, huge change, was that mirroring the reporting requirement of a milestone inspection. Once you get your milestone inspection, then you have 45 days to provide that to the unit owners. The change that they made this year is, we need to also do that for SIRS. So that's essentially the reporting, the change is that, when you get your SIRS done, you have 45 days to provide that to the unit owners. So with that, Matt, do you want to go? And then I'm certainly here if any other questions come up going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks, Travis. And yeah, that was kind of the big change. One other change for our any participants in maybe in South or West Florida that may have buildings that are still uninhabitable from Ian. They did put a carve out, or if a future storm happens, there's a carve out there if the building is deemed uninhabitable. The SIRS funding does not need to happen, but hopefully that's not any of us today that have to worry about uninhabitable buildings. As soon as the building becomes habitable, the funding kicks in. So again, they made it pretty loud and clear. I think they sent a strong message that these requirements are not going away. So let's jump in, and Travis, that was just awesome. And I feel like we could do 2 or 3 hours on all of these legal updates.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there will be more on legal updates, but thank you so much for giving everybody a high level view and some resources to go learn more here. As far as the funding, and it's you know, it's interesting because Travis is this awesome liaison between the legislatures. I don't think the legislatures understand all the nuances clearly, but Travis has an outstanding handle on it, and even with the division. So we're kind of coordinating with, he's mentioned the DBPR a few times, kind of coordinating these informations, these types of things, what I'm going to be talking about now, like to the folks that are making the policy, to really understand, have a common set of terminology and knowledge for that. And I want to bring you guys all up to speed on this as well. So we're going to talk about the 2 main funding methodologies really quick. In Florida, we always had component reserves until the administrative code changed in 2003. And that allowed us to do what they said, group the assets or pool the assets together. So that's where this term pooled funding came. And we always call that the cash flow method. So the cash flow method of funding reserves, it really looks at cash flow, inflows and outflows of cash, and a funding plan that's designed to offset them and to ensure that the balances are offset. We'll show a few examples of that here. Component funding, sometimes called straight line or line item funding. This is just the funding of the sum of the individual components, so the depreciation of each component. We'll get into just a real quick, we won't get into a whole, we've got a whole nother webinar that we did about a month ago that's on the YouTube about those 2 methodologies and a deep dive example of both. But the object, and I think the overall purpose, is something that's well defined by Community Associations Institute, CAI, which I've mentioned a couple of times now. In their explanation of reserve study standards, they define what this term called adequate reserves. And I really like this term because it's a little bit less confusing, a little bit more vague, but it really accomplishes what I think we all try to accomplish, is a replacement fund that has an equitable multi-year plan that allows for the timely execution of projects, replacement of things on time without additional supplemental funding. So we don't have to special assess, we don't have to go get loans, we don't have to defer projects if we have adequate reserves. And so this chart, I'll show a few of these here, just a real high level. The blue bars facing downward are reserve expenditures in per year. On the x-axis is the years. The green bars are the income, and the purple line is the balance. So you can see in this particular project, new project, it's building up over time. Over the first 7-8 years, reaches close to 350,000, and kind of hovers in this area. And then the big expenses come at years 25 and 30, which is not uncommon for a lot of community associations. So this would be considered adequate funding, and we'll dive into a little more details on that. So within adequate funding, there's really 3 strategies or goals outlined in the National Reserve Study Standards, and a lot of confusion around them. So I'm going to just really first touch on them. The baseline funding essentially means baseline funding is the highest risk level, the lowest cost of fund. Full funding would be the lowest risk level, the highest cost of fund, and the threshold is usually somewhere in the middle. So let's dive in and just define each of those really quick, because I think those terms are really important for us. If you're doing reserve studies with providers, you're seeing these terms. Unfortunately, the state material doesn't have these terms in their definitions quite yet, but we think, and we're encouraging them to try to consider something like this to really define what it is that they're asking for associations, so that, again, we have a common terminology. But we hear a lot in the state of Florida, you got fully funded reserves. Then when SIRS came out, it's like, oh, we have to have fully funded reserves. Well, according to the National Reserve Study Standards, fully funded, full funding of the reserves essentially means the balance is equal to the sum of the fully funded balance of each item. And the fully funded balance of each item is the cost times the effective age divided by useful life. All that means is if you have a $100,000 roof, it's got a 10-year life. the fully funded balance in year 5 is going to be 50,000. In year 7, the fully funded balance is going to be 70,000. In year 8, it's going to be 80,000. It's the proportionate balance that would have kind of offset the cost of that project based on its age. You take that for the roof and the painting and paving, everything else, you add that all up, and that's the fully funded balance for the community association. So this is kind of, again, it's kind of that straight line depreciation. It's making sure that you've got a bucket of money for every single project. And it's really one of the highest funding levels, like we said, highest level, less risk options out there. And it's allowed, but we're finding most associations finding it's a little bit too high of a cost to shoulder. So we did a little case study here. I'm just going to run you through real quick. This was a new building, 31 units. So they didn't have a lot of near-term expenses, but you can see, out again in years 20 and 30, like most of our communities, 15, 20, 30, we start to have roofs, we start to have more structural repairs, railings, elevators, things of that nature that need to be repaired. So this particular case, again, you can see the green bars and the blue bars there are inflows and outflows. But in this case, that purple line, the reserve balance, kind of just grows the entire time. And this is pretty common as you reach 100%. They didn't have any money to start, so their percent funded was very low. But you can see that that's the orange line. The percent funded builds up very quickly to 60%, and it goes up higher to up over 100%, and kind of lands at 100%. In this particular case, was requiring an annual contribution of about $213 per owner. Again, 31 unit building, so that was $79,000 a year, and over the 30 years, $2.36 million. So that, again, the highest funding level, the highest funding goal, and most conservative way to fund it, but not always necessary. And I think that's what gets confused in Florida when we say full funding. We don't necessarily mean that we need to achieve 100% of the fully funded balance. Going back to my other example, we're really just, if we have that $100,000 roof and we're in year 7 and we got 3 years to go, as long as we have $33,334 going into the budget each year for the next 3 years, we're saying our budget is fully funded. And essentially, that's more of a cash flow type of look. So the middle level, the kind of the in between, I call it the Goldilocks approach for a lot of associations, and probably our most common recommendation is threshold funding. And then this just the definition of threshold funding really just is the reserve contributions that maintain a balance above a certain threshold, either dollar amount or percent funded, which is determined by the board and or your professional. So here's the same case study, same 31 unit building, same expenses, but instead of trying to build that balance up to I think it was well over $1 million as we got up to the latter part of the study. This is more of a balanced, again, adequate funding plan. So they build up the reserves here, and it never drops below. Once it gets past year 2 or 3, this one's never going to drop below $100,000. So this case, even after all these expenses the association's planning on, they still have $100,000 left in the bank as a bit of a cushion. So the annual funding here, $52,000, again, quite a bit less than the prior example, and $141 a month. So much more moderate, much more attractive to a lot of communities, and again, this threshold funding still meets the goals of the state and meets the goals of the community, and that there's funds available. The other option that the state does allow is baseline funding. And this would be like we said, the least conservative and least expensive option, essentially taking this purple line all the way down to $0. So we're going to take it all the way down to zero. We don't have any cushion right out here in 2051 at that lowest year. And you can see the difference there, about $9 less per owner per month. I'm sorry, I guess this was an annual contribution. Anyway, I think that should be monthly contribution, but less than $9 a month different from the baseline to the threshold method. Again, both of these significantly less. I think I have a recap on the next slide. Just a recap. Again, baseline funding for this community is $132 per month per owner. The threshold was $141, and the full funding was $213. Again, all of these meet the requirements for reserves in Florida. All of them meet requirements for SIRS. So SIRS reserves are not looked at differently in these goals. Those structural integrity reserves can all be funded with any one of these methods. And so it's really understanding the tolerance, the risk tolerance of the association, the community, and the level of comfort that the board has. I would say our firm is very heavily seeing recommendations with the threshold funding level. And the threshold can be obviously a point of discussion, but a little bit of a cushion is always a good deal, especially when you're talking about a relatively minor difference of a few dollars per month per owner to keep the reserves from getting into a dangerously low position. Now, I will say this: I mentioned this was a newer building, relatively small. We're seeing much larger spread when we run this example on a more complex building, and especially in older buildings with many components that maybe haven't been funded, a community that's further behind on their funding as they get longer in the tooth, if you will. It's not uncommon to see the full funding amount approach 2, 3, or even 4 times the requirement for threshold funding. So this is a significant spread. It's still $72 between threshold and full funding. But we are seeing again in many cases where it would be nearly impossible for a community to get all the way to the full funding amount. So most are looking for threshold and some baseline. But all those are options for you in your SIRS. So what have we learned with SIRS? Well, as Travis said, the deadline is December 31st, 2024. And then funding for SIRS items cannot be waived in full or part after that for any budget adopted on or after December 31st. Reserve funds can't be used for any other purpose for that, and that should say SIRS for the SIRS items adopted on or after December 31st. So because of these laws, and this was really part of 4D and SB 154 did not change this year, we're essentially seeing a need to have 2 reserve accounts, one for structural items because the funding cannot be used for the structural items cannot be used for anything else. And we have another webinar with all the information about what these items are in SIRS, and we can certainly go to our website and find the list, but it's roofing, painting, waterproofing, fireproofing, plumbing, electrical, windows and doors. It is not elevators, air conditioning, pavement, swimming pools, other really important, significant items in our communities that still need reserve funds. But because of these laws now, for any budget adopted on or after December 31st, the SIRS money could never be used to fund your elevator modernization or your paving project. So essentially, you need a separate set of reserves for the non-structural items to meet. And we think, by this deadline, it should start to be established for any budget adopted on or after. Travis, do you want to talk about? Well, you want to talk about just what that means. So most of us are adopting budgets right in November, right? Or does that? And you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, and there's just it's gray. I'll put it that way as it relates to there's some thought of, okay, well, when do we have to have this this budget in operation? Is it the 2025 budget or the 2026 budget? And the study and the budget that you get your reserve study, let's say by October of 2024, and the budget that's then put together and gone out to vote in November of 2024, that budget must be based on that reserve study and be fully funded and using whichever method you described that association decides to use, but it has to have those reserves have to be accounted for. However, the membership, and that's the work of the board. The board, they are obligated to do that. But then the membership in November can still vote. They still have the power for 2 more months, let's call it. They are still able to vote to either waive, partially fund, or fully fund, but they could waive those requirements still going into that 2025 budget. I would not advise them to do that. You know, but they certainly they have the power to do that. So typically that 2025 budget, nobody's going to be doing their 2025 budget on January 1 of 2025. They're already going to have done it. So the unit owner still has their power to make a vote. Then after that, when you get into 2025 and you no longer can. The structural SIRS items, there is no vote anymore on those. Those items that you enumerated, the 8 items or so, those have to be funded. The other items that you mentioned, that maybe that's why you have that other reserve bucket that you talked about, that other pool for elevator, paving, swimming pool, lobby furniture, tile, you know, in the lobby, whatever. Those can still be waived or reduced. It's just the threshold will change to do that. You have to have a majority of the total voting interests. So I don't know if that, and the other, really honestly, from an enforcement standpoint, knowing how DBPR and the staffing, I'm just going to tell you that the enforcement for this, in my mind, is not going to come from a state agency coming in on, it's going to be anytime anybody in that building tries to get a mortgage, your insurance, both for the HO6 unit owner policies and for the master policies, those people are going to ask and say, all right, I want a copy of your latest SIRS. I want a copy of your budget that shows that you're funding to the levels that your SIRS says you're supposed to, that you're having these reserves. So if you don't have that to produce, then that person isn't getting a mortgage, which starts to greatly impact the value of those units.
Absolutely, for sure. And I think that you're absolutely right. I think that's going to be probably the main driver. We don't think that we're going to get them all done. I don't think the industry is large enough to get everything done by that deadline. But you know, again, and it's interesting. I had a couple of associations tell me, you know, like, well, we're planning to approve our budget. We always plan to approve our budget in November or December. But there are cases where we don't get a quorum, or something comes up where someone's traveling or someone gets sick. Now, all of a sudden that budget gets approved. It can get approved in January, and the deadline goes. So they're trying to be very conservative with what they're planning for, because who knows what December is going to look like exactly. So they are kind of planning ahead, because you're absolutely right. I think it's going to make selling units in buildings that have not conducted the SIRS and adopted the funding going to be very difficult because of folks that are looking at it now. There's some nuances. So this slide just points out that the paragraph G items for communities that are required to have a SIRS, the paragraph G items must be based on the most recent SIRS. So and there's an exclusion for items that have a RUL remaining useful life of greater than 25 years,
or that's indeterminate, right?
Or an indeterminate, right? So greater than 25 years or indeterminate, it can be excluded.
Okay. And also, Matt, I just want to make sure, are you, just to not forget, so I can do, are you going to answer this question that there is in there about the funds in separate accounts?
Yeah. So yeah, I think I believe it's the administrative code said funds can be commingled for investment purposes. So that's my understanding, is that's probably still going to be the case, but on your balance sheet, there still should be a liability. Like I answered another question, we're still going to have a liability for, at a minimum, a structural pool of reserves and a non-structural pool of reserves. The adjustment, so the funding must be based on the most recent SIRS. So if Travis is absolutely right, you get your SIRS in October, that should be what you're basing your budget on, even if the owners waive it. Boards going forward have the option to adjust for 2 reasons that are called out in the statute. One, inflation. So most of our reserve studies are going to include a nominal inflation rate, but if it's significantly higher or lower, the board could adjust for that. And also changes caused by deferred maintenance. Now, I don't know how that's going to exactly be looked at or policed. I think that's going to be probably a point of contention that boards will have, and say, well, you know, we washed off our building, we washed off the roof, so we think it's going to last another 20 years. Is that going to pass muster? I don't think so. It wouldn't to me, but it remains to be seen what they're going to consider as a change for deferred maintenance. We'll just have to see how this kind of gets implemented. None of it's required just yet. And so we haven't, the division, and we're working closely with the division as well to try to understand, what they're going to be looking for specifically when they take that budget and compare it to the most recent SIRS, and what are they trying to match up in there. And that's going to be, it's a learning curve for folks for the most part. And then I think my last slide is just what have we seen so far? What are we facing? And again, we are conducted hundreds of structural integrity reserve studies. We're seeing that currently associations are setting aside an average per owner per month of $143. Now, there's many associations out there and in this data that are setting aside zero. There's many associations that are setting aside much more. This is large associations, small associations, new, old. It's a large data set, but it varies greatly. So keep that in mind. Your community is going to likely going to look different. But if we look at all the communities that we've looked at, when we started the project, they were setting aside $143 per month per owner aside from reserves. The SIRS, then we conduct the SIRS. Okay, going forward, what should the budget be adjusted to? And it was almost essentially doubling the reserve requirements for these communities. There's a 65-35 split that we're seeing. So 65% of items on average, again, are falling into the structural category, the dollar amounts. The non-structural items, again, things like air conditioning, swimming pools, pavement, would be falling in the other side. Because unless your pool is on your plaza deck or on the rooftop, then it might be structural. There's some nuance there, but for the most part, the general, we're calling it general. You could call it non-structural or non-SIRS items are making up about $100. So because you can still waive this this orange portion here with a vote of the owners, majority of the owners, to get into compliance, we are talking on average about a $56, $53 increase to meet the minimum requirement of funding structural. So while still significant, it is not overbearing for associations on average. But we are seeing, again, from the more responsible communities that have reserved more, that gap is much smaller. For communities that have waived or have reserves that are sufficiently underfunded, it's a much larger catch up. So it's hard to do these averages, but I wanted to just kind of show what we've seen so far. And again, the properties are hit hardest are the ones that have not funded before. But again, those properties that have made sometimes difficult decision. As board members, we know this, right? And to kind of wrap up here, like it is not fun to tell your neighbors that they have to raise their association fees. But I'll remind board members, first of all, it's not your fault to do that. And second of all, you do have the fiduciary duty to protect the investment in the property. And I think that's why, again, like I started off, that's why I'm on my board and we want to protect the investment. This is not, these funds are really not going to some rainy day. These are going to the depreciation and deterioration that's occurring every day in your community. And these funds are going to offset the eventual special assessment that you would have had if you didn't have the funds available. So it's really an investment in the community.
And that's what I was going to say, Matt, is that, I mean, and I'm not trying to be, overly Pollyanna, because yes, that is an increase, but it's, you're not playing the game of, I'm going to spend nothing now and then just let me know when I owe it and I'll pay a big special assessment. Because you're paying it now, there isn't what you're doing is saying we're not going to have a big special assessment because we're putting the money away step by step before we get there.
Exactly. And the other thing I was going to say, this set of data is based on, we talked about the methods. This is based on pooled methodology, because again, most of our associations are looking at two pools, and it's based on the threshold method. So if we were looking at this at the full funding method, these numbers are going to vary greatly, but that's, this is kind of the averages. And, I want to, again, I know we're getting a little bit long on time. One question that we can try to answer, which I think it still has, I think you and I, Travis, I know agree on this question that Richard asked: how are associations allocating it to a SIRS and non-structural funding account? And of course, the amounts, Richard, we just kind of covered depending on what makes the most sense. I didn't actually mention this. We're looking at upcoming needs in each category to determine how much to put in each individual account. If we're taking one pool and dividing it into two pools, It really depends what's going on with each pool. But as far as to do that, because the statutes say you can only spend reserves on their intended purpose, you're potentially putting reserves into another purpose. So in order to do that, the statute said would require a vote of the membership, majority of the voting interests, to essentially establish or move the funds into a potentially different purpose. If you've got, if you already had a reserve, so you just have reserves for roofing and painting, and that's your pool, I suppose you could say, well, those are the intended purpose of those are the same as the structural intended purpose for those items. So maybe that's not a vote required, but I'm not sure. That's probably a legal question. And Travis, we've been asked that before, and it would be good to have some clarification on that. But I'm afraid right now it looks like it's got to be a heavy lift, and
Right.
that the board has.
And without going into a long and yeah, without going into the long debates that you or the discussions that you and I have had on that, I would be safe and say as you're putting together these two pools, I would go to the unit owners for that vote. Because inevitably there's something in that pool that owners voted to set that up for reserving of something, even if it was just the 4 items that were before. One of those is paving, and paving now no longer is in that category. So the short answer is in order to set those up and differentiate, I would go and have a membership vote.